Good morning, church. It's good to be with you this morning. I wanted to, before we jump into our text for the morning, I wanted to give you a little preview of what's coming next. So today is the last day in this series that we have been calling The Outsiders, which is focused on Esther and Ruth. It is also today, coincidentally, the end of what is called ordinary time in the lectionary, which we don't really follow, but we kind of bounce off it here and there throughout the year. And next Sunday begins Advent. And and we are beginning next Sunday a series called The Upside Down Kingdom that will take us all the way to Easter Sunday. So, I don't know, 18 weeks seems like a good idea to me. But we're going to go through the Gospel of Luke from Advent hope to resurrection joy. Luke's Gospel shows us a kingdom that turns empires upside down by serving the least. And it shows us all kinds of gospel themes that form who we are as we seek to follow Jesus. Mercy over vengeance, enemy love over domination, all kinds of big ideas that hopefully will challenge us and give us hope as we seek to follow Jesus in this world. And so we invite you to join us for the Upside Down Kingdom and as we lean into the Gospel of Luke. But this morning, we finish the book of Ruth. And so we are going to read chapter 4, and it reads like this. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate and sat down there just as the guardian redeemer he had mentioned came along. Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here," and they did so. Then he said to the guardian redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know, for no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the dead man's widow, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." At this, the guardian redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it, because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself, I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel. So the guardian redeemer said to Boaz, buy it yourself, and he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabite, Mahlon's widow, as my wife, in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from his hometown. Today you are witnesses." Then the elders and all the people at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the family of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. When he made love to her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took the child in her arms and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. And he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron. Hezron was the father of Ram. Ram was the father of Aminadab. Aminadab, the father of Nahshon. Nahshon, the father of Salmon. Salmon, the father of Boaz. Boaz, the father of Obed. Obed, the father of Jesse. And Jesse, the father of David. Please join me in prayer. Bless us this day, O Lord, with vision. May this place be a sacred place, a telling space, where heaven and earth meet. Amen. So there is this strange thing that happens at covenant events. And maybe it happens at other events, but since I have spent my whole adult life as a covenant pastor for the most part, I don't know how other, organizations or people operate. But this happens at every covenant event. It even happens here pretty often on Sunday mornings. And that is that when people are gathering, they gather in doorways. Or even more annoying, they gather at the top or bottom of the escalator. And they cluster and they talk. And they talk. And they talk. Standing in the middle of the doorway, or the top of the escalator, or the bottom of the escalator. And I have always been like, why do we do this? And I'm not like pointing fingers. I've been involved from time to time in such a gathering myself. But it always perplexed me. It's like, what is it in our nature that makes us do that? And to gum up like the flow, right? I mean, people are trying to get their coffee. Let's keep our priorities straight. And then I read Ruth chapter 4 and realized that maybe this is biblical. Because it tells us that the elders gathered at the gate of the city. And this is a theme throughout the Old Testament, and there's, boring academics will tell you that this is because Palestinian cities, they didn't design big places like the Forum in Roman architecture or the Agora in Greek architecture, places where people could meet. And so they would find space at the city gate, and that's where the elders would gather to have important conversations. And ever since, church folk have been gathering in doorways and the top and the bottom of the escalator to discuss important matters. At any rate, in our story of Ruth, Boaz goes to the city gate because he knows that the kinsman redeemer, the guardian redeemer for Ruth is going to, at some point, has to come by there. And he needs to speak to him to negotiate this deal. And as we read, verse 1, Boaz sees him. What's interesting, you'll note, is that the narrator of the story never tells us the name of this guy. I mean, he's like a pretty important story, at least for the plot, a part of the story, at least for the plot, right? But we never learn his name. And in fact, this phrase, "come over here, my friend, and sit down," is how the NIV translates it. But apparently, the two Hebrew words that they're translating there is really rather, according to one commentator, rather like our so-and-so. So-and-so come, hey, so-and-so, come over here and sit down. Which I just thought was interesting. We translate it, come over here, my friend, and sit down. And perhaps that's the connotation of those words in Hebrew. But literally translated, it's kind of nondescript. But I wanted to talk particularly this morning about this idea of the guardian redeemer, because this is a foreign concept to us. We don't have anything like this in our culture. The guardian redeemer is a guardian redeemer or kinsman redeemer, depending on which translation you read, is someone who is in a family member, a close family member, probably a cousin or an uncle, depending on who's left, right, in the line of succession. But they are one who purchases a relative from slavery, actual or potential. And then there's also this idea of a kinsman avenger. A kinsman avenger provides justice on behalf of a relative. But both concepts reflect the image of God as Redeemer. And so the idea is that the relative would act on the behalf of their relative who is vulnerable, who has either been sold or is in danger of being sold into slavery, who has either been wronged or is potentially going to be wronged. And the kinsman redeemer is one who steps in on their behalf and makes sure that they are safe, that they get to participate in life fully. It's interesting, one of the commentators I read as I was looking at this concept said this about, as we see in our story, the first kinsman redeemer, for whatever reason, decides he cannot redeem Ruth and Naomi, and so he takes off his sandal and he passes that on to Boaz. But I saw this comment about the idea of redemption. This was a sacred duty. And the suggestion is that to deny redemption, this commentator wrote, is to infringe on Yahweh's rights. In other words, to annul the gains of the Exodus. To refuse redemption is to infringe on Yahweh's rights and to, in effect, annul the gains of the Exodus. And the reason is because if the vulnerable person is not redeemed, they go into bondage. And they are not then participating in the shalom of God. They're in bondage. They're oppressed. And so that's how deep this idea runs. The kinsman redeemer is one who participates in redemption. Now, here's a little piece that we need to, I think, just sit with for a minute. We hear the word redeem, right? And where do we automatically go? Jesus, right? But what kind of redemption? We think heaven, right? And that is most certainly true, thanks be to God. But it also, as we know, as we look at the idea of shalom and redemption in the Old Testament, redemption involves not just going to heaven when we die, but the release of people, animals, or property from bondage through outside help. God as Redeemer comes and he redeems his people in Egypt by what? by delivering them from slavery, from moving them from bondage to freedom. And so redemption is much richer than just the idea of where we go one day in the sweet by and by. It's very much about the fact that God is redeeming us, delivering us into a different reality. And it goes without saying that this kind of redemption can only be accomplished or effected by someone who is strong or rich, and that's the idea of the kinsman redeemer, right? I mean, imagine how frustrating and I would imagine shaming it would be if a close relative of yours in this culture came to you and said, like Boaz does here, Naomi needs to be redeemed. And you would have to say, I don't have any money. I can't do it. Now, we don't know why the kinsman redeemer in this story chooses not to redeem Naomi. There is some discussion that it is perhaps racial because Ruth the Moabite is mentioned. And so that for this person, that perhaps they didn't want to take on that idea of marrying a foreign wife. It didn't, going to Moab didn't turn out so well for Naomi and her family, so maybe they didn't want to invite that. We don't know. That's all part of the kind of the extra textual conversation. But he refused, and Boaz stepped in. It's important for us, I think, to recognize, even though this is such a foreign concept to us, that the kinsman redeemer is a reflection of God. And of course, the ultimate redeemer is Jesus the Christ. In Naomi's culture, and in the story of Ruth, the kinsman redeemer is the family's built-in safety net. It is their social security, if you will. It is their Medicare. It's the whole deal. And if you happen to have the bad luck of not having a family who can do those things, well, then you end up in slavery. And it happened all the time. But the guardian redeemer is a built-in safety net. Now, one of the things that strikes me as we look at this idea of a guardian redeemer is that if we look at these two stories from a little bit of a different perspective, the stories of Ruth and Esther, one of the things that we will notice is that both stories give us examples of leveraging privilege to bring justice and shalom to their communities. Both the stories of Esther and Ruth give us examples of people leveraging their privilege in order to bring justice and shalom to their communities. Esther stepped into her identity both as a Jew and as a queen and leveraged the one to save the other. She took steps that put herself at risk, and she leveraged that position to deliver her people from Haman's evil edict. Ruth set aside her rights, her privilege, when she chose to go with Naomi. Right? Ruth could have stayed in Moab, where, at least as far as we know, she had family, and she could have restarted her life in a place that she knew, with the people that she knew, where there was probably a little more security than wandering on off across the desert back to Bethlehem. Ruth she set aside that privilege to go with Naomi. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you go, I go. Where you die, I die. She leverages that and she goes with Naomi, and then she takes action, uncovering Boaz's feet. We don't have time. To secure their future with Boaz. And then Boaz facilitates the release of the right of old so-and-so, right? To redeem Ruth and Naomi. But our ultimate example of this is Jesus. You see, I think that whole idea of the kinsman redeemer is a prefiguring of Jesus, of the Messiah, of what the Messiah does for us and for the world. Paul says it this way in Philippians 2. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as that of Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. What does that sound like? It sounds like leveraging privilege. Who did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Did not consider equality with God as something to be used to his own advantage. Now, I recognize this whole idea can be a little hard for us. This idea of setting aside rights, of leveraging our privilege in order to help others. As U.S. Christians, we have been brought up in a culture of rights, right? Right? I mean, how old are we when we first hear the idea of that we have certain inalienable rights? And for many of us, we have lived lives in which those rights have never been questioned. Not once. Which, of course, breeds the myth of self-reliance. Because when those rights are never questioned, we begin to believe that we did it ourselves. One of our kids, when they were little, from a very young age, would not allow us to feed them. So very early, we're just starting them on foods, and when we would come with the spoon, they would knock that spoon away, and they weren't having it. And as they grew older, their favorite phrase, as is true of many toddlers, is, I doey. I doey. And so we exist in this world where we have all these rights, and it teaches us to think that they're all because of us and we did it. We're self-made people, ignoring all of the ways that community and the culture that we live in contribute to us becoming who we are. So our question then is this: are you ready to set aside your rights and allow Jesus to redeem you? Because one of the things you'll notice in a whole lot of these stories is it is not until a person comes to the end of themselves that God is able to use them. So the question then is, are you ready to set aside your rights in order to allow Jesus to redeem you? We have these ideas that somehow we do it. But the reality is that we all, every one of us, for different reasons and for different sins, needs a kinsman redeemer to come and rescue us from our land of bondage, from our vulnerability. Because we are either in bondage or we are on our way to bondage. The routes that we get there can be very different. As I look at our congregation, right? I think one of the things that we do well to think about in the church is to remember this fact, that we all need a redeemer. Because the longer we follow Jesus, the more we forget how much we need a redeemer. Like maybe when we were young, we did some crazy stuff, and Jesus saved us, but ever since, I've been doing it myself. Or we start to think that way. Or, when I was young, I did some crazy stuff, but now I'm really good, and so I can talk about that the way that other people aren't. Now, as we go through the Gospel of Luke, we will get to Luke 15, which is called the lost chapter, because you have the lost coin, the lost son, and the lost sheep. Remember in the story that we generally call the prodigal son, that there are two sons, and we will learn that they are both lost. The older son stands outside on the porch and refuses to come into the party because he's done everything right. And it's not fair. And so the question for us is, are you willing to set aside your rights and allow Jesus to redeem you? As the band comes up, I want you to think about, or maybe notice something else about this whole redemption project. It is such good news that Jesus comes to redeem us. Whether we find ourselves at risk like Ruth and Naomi, or whether we find ourselves in the halls of power like Esther, we need Jesus. But here's the thing that Jesus does, is he doesn't just redeem us. He redeems us and then he sends us. You maybe notice that in both these stories, in both Esther and Ruth, God's redemption starts with them, but then flows out through them to many. From Esther to the Jewish people. Now watch this. From Ruth to Obed, to Jesse, to David, and ultimately to Jesus and the redemption of all things, including you and me. Thanks be to God.